where the people fear the government when the government should fear its people.
People might not say, I'm mad and gerrymandering is the reason, or I'm mad we need redistricting reform, but the things they tend to be mad at are things that gerrymandering produces.
Build the Workers' Party!
I think it's done more damage to democracy in our country than anything else. Not even a close call.
United we fight! Divided we fall! United we fight! United we fight!
The government is there to represent the people, not the representatives picking the people that they want to vote for. We don't want a rigged system. This is America. And more importantly, it's Virginia.
Many states are now reforming their congressional districts as a result of the 1960 census. And inevitably, this leads to charges of gerrymandering directed at both parties.
Well, it's still, even if you could pass those proposals, you could still have a good deal of gerrymandering.
With a 98% rate of re-election, a seat in Congress is one of the most secure jobs in America.
We'd had in Virginia, ever since about 1851, middle of the 19th century, the rule that congressional districts had to be contiguous and compact. You can sort of imagine a district that is compact and contiguous, as opposed to the districts we actually have most of the time that look like Rorschach tests. They're splattered all over the map, clearly not contiguous or compact.
Okay, our first district is Maryland's 3rd district. So I want you to look at this and tell me any image that comes to mind, okay? So what do you see?
Like a face with eyes and a nose?
The next one is Virginia's 20th Senate District.
Ooh, I don't know. It's just kind of like all over the place. You know what? It kind of looks like the Loch Ness Monster.
What do you see?
Wow. That one looks like kind of like a snake that's been run over by a car.
A lion?
That's an obese lion. It's okay. I mean, this is the world we live in now.
Yeah, because there's his feet. There's 2 feet.
Tiny feet.
I guess maybe those are the other 2, and he's got a...
Let's go to the next one. Okay.
Oh, it's like an evil guy laughing.
An evil guy laughing.
At a city.
With the humps, and then that's his head sticking out.
I see that.
I can't believe that's a district.
Like the teeth are like this, right here. He's like...
He's maniacally laughing
Yeah.
at what appears to be if I may, a crumbling cityscape.
Yeah.
Like a dragon on its back, like floating in a pool or something. It's got its legs up in the air.
It's just relaxing.
Yeah.
He's not looking to breathe fire and destroy castles.
No, he's not on the clock.
This next one is Virginia's 8th congressional district in Northern Virginia.
Ooh, like a dancing man. He's like standing on his tippy toes and he's sort of thrusting his arms out and his head's tilted forward. It's Michael Jackson.
So Virginia's 8th reminds you of the King of Pop.
Absolutely.
So what exactly is gerrymandering? Simply put, gerrymandering is the manipulation of district lines to determine which voters are in the district, the outcome of an election, or even if there will be an election in which we have a choice. How does this happen? We better start at the beginning. Every 10 years, the U.S. Constitution mandates that every resident of the United States be counted in the census. A questionnaire is sent to every household in America and is due to be returned to the U.S. Census Bureau on Census Day, April 1st. Yes, April 1st. The data collected ultimately determines how and where representation is distributed within the House of Representatives and in state legislatures. And the process by which these district lines are drawn is called redistricting. Now, here's where it gets tricky. How those lines are actually drawn every 10 years is left to the discretion of state legislatures, or more specifically, the legislators whose party happens to be in power at the time of the census. Since these legislators are politicians who will face elections every 2 or 4 years, district boundaries can be critical in deciding which voters are within the boundaries whether he or she will have an opponent, whether it will be a competitive race, even whether the outcome of an election will be in doubt. As you might imagine, this process lends itself to district lines being manipulated by the politicians drawing them, giving an advantage to the party in power, favoring one political party over another. The term gerrymandering dates back to 1812, when Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry signed a bill that allowed districts to be drawn to favor his political party, the Democratic-Republican Party. Yes, it no longer exists. The lines drawn were so contorted that one of the districts was believed to resemble a salamander. A cartoon highlighting the new map and the South Essex Salamander District ran in the Boston Gazette in 1812 with the headline, "Gerrymander, a new species of monster." But while Governor Gerry may get the credit, some scholars believe Governor Patrick Henry of Virginia was the first to use political redistricting. In 1788, he attempted to fix an election for Congress by creating a district to force future President James Madison to face James Monroe, another future president.
In my mind, it should be Henrymandering. It shouldn't be gerrymandering, because the first efforts to essentially draw somebody out of their district was done by Patrick Henry.
I believe I have found an answer to our problem with Mr. Madison. Mr. Madison and I have our differences. He, as you know, is a Federalist. Just what we need, a strong central government. We've only recently freed ourselves from a strong central government. I, however, have a plan that should be able to thwart Madison and his Federalist allies. All we have to do is draw the lines so that Madison's home, Montpelier, is in the same district number 5 as that of James Monroe. I believe we can say with some confidence that Mr. James Madison will not stand a chance against James Monroe.
Virginia is the home of the original effort to draw somebody out of their district for political purposes, to choose voters, if you will, in the history of this country. Like many things that Massachusetts tries to claim it was first in, and Virginia really was, this is one of them also.
Actually, that plan failed. James Madison was elected anyway, and Governor Henry avoided going down in history with the indignity of Henrymandering. 24 years later, when Madison was elected to his second term as president, his vice president was Elbridge Gerry. Go figure.
Legislators now pick their voters rather than voters pick their legislator. It really happens. You see, if you take a set of precincts, if you draw them north-south, it might have an outcome historically predictable that the Democrats would win. But if you draw the district east-west, it may have an outcome of Republicans controlling it. And guess what? The way this works, of course, is by human nature, the people in office want to stay in office, want power, so they draw that district in the direction that would serve their interests most.
12 localities in that one district that I could actually get in my car and drive from my driveway to the White House from Portsmouth in about the same amount of time as it took me to get to the end of the district in Halifax and South Boston, that bumped right up to Martinsville in Pennsylvania County.
We're certainly seeing in state after state, whether it's Illinois or Michigan or Indiana or Delaware or Virginia, that there are a surprising number of voters. Oftentimes in polls, it's a high majority of 70 or 80% of voters who instinctively get that redistricting should not be drawn, lines should not be drawn by legislators themselves, because it leads to a fundamentally broken system.
But I do think it's very difficult for us to try to draw these lines. There isn't any doubt that they're unsatisfactorily drawn, not only for the Congress, which is not the worst offender, but for state legislatures, where we have very, and have had for many years, notorious examples of gerrymandering, but which is a responsibility for the states, not the federal government.
Even the body that the framers of our Constitution intended to be the most vulnerable to shifts in public attitudes, the House of Representatives, has, with a combination of gerrymandering, changes in campaign finance rules, and the powers of incumbency, become a virtually permanent chamber, no longer truly responsive to the people.
No single factor is more basic to restoring competitive elections than ensuring fair redistricting. I propose a new criteria for redistricting without favor to party. To respect established community boundaries, we must draw district lines that respect the needs of the people, not tailor them to the political needs of either party.
If we want a better politics, it's not enough just to change a congressman or change a senator or even change a president. We have to change the system to reflect our better selves. I think we've got to end the practice of drawing our congressional districts so that politicians can pick their voters and not the other way around.
It shouldn't surprise us that presidents of both parties have come out strongly in favor of redistricting reform, as well as a number of other political leaders who know the process well. Everybody realizes that this is something that both parties have been guilty of in the past, and it's got to end.
So how does gerrymandering actually work? In 2015, the Washington Post gave a clear example of how this happens. Let's say we have 50 people who have to be divided among 5 districts, with each district sending 1 representative to the House of Representatives. Of those 50 people, 60% are in the blue party and 40% are in the red party. Now, if you were able to draw district lines so that you have 3 perfect blue districts and 2 red districts, you're home free. Problem is, that's not always possible, even in the absence of politics, when districts are supposed to be compact and contiguous. So let's try to make these a little more compact. If we divide it this way, that's compact, but look what happens. 5 blue districts and not a single red district, even though nearly half the voters are red, so it's not fair. And the lines could even be drawn so they're not compact or fair. If we do it this way, we end up with just 2 blue districts and 3 red districts, in spite of the fact that well over half the voters are blue. That's what happens all too often with gerrymandering. The bottom line is, if districts are manipulated to be drawn in a manner that promotes the self-interest of legislators while ignoring the interests of the citizens, your voice does not matter and your vote does not count. In the words of former Justice Department Chief Jerry Hebert, gerrymandering is the process of turning democracy on its head. With recent polls showing that more Americans believe in Bigfoot than approve of the job Congress is doing, the process of manipulating district lines has several consequences, whether the public realizes it or not.
The central problem with it is that gerrymandering, the way it's done now, produces a maximum number of non-competitive seats. And then if somebody is in a non-competitive seat, they don't have to be that responsive to their constituents. The other thing it does is it tends to produce districts that are overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democratic, which means that the elections often go to the people who have kind of the positions at the edge, the more extreme positions.
The most harmful consequence is that it is one of the factors that is fueling the rampant partisanship and gridlock that is being experienced both in Washington and in Richmond, where things can't get done or that there is such vitriol between the two political parties that partisan success is more important than good government.
Right now, qualified folks, maybe folks from the business community, maybe a retired CEO who wants to come in and say, I want to bring my business experience or her business experience to the job, it's not going to do it because you can't win.
Gerrymandering means more often than not that the real election becomes the primary. And the primary, and again, for both political parties, is often dominated by the most extreme voices. So you have a minority of the minority, in effect, choosing who's going to be your congressman or who's going to be your state senator or state delegate. And too often that means it makes the candidates who are nominated to the extremes of the left or the right. And we see then that kind of breakdown take place in dramatic ways here in Washington. And unfortunately, we're seeing it take place more and more often in Richmond.
with both political parties now being polarized for the most part on the right and the left, one of the things that's changed is that there are no moderates. Or few moderates in either political party, and certainly virtually no liberals in the Republican Party and no conservatives in the Democratic Party. That's changed. That was not the case 20 or 30 years ago.
I told the General Assembly during my State of the Commonwealth, let us work together on job creation, economic development, education, transportation, all of these issues which voters elected us to do, and don't waste your time sending me socially divisive pieces of legislation, because I'll veto them. But they still went ahead and did it. Why did they do it? Because they've got to worry about the primary.
Whether you're a liberal or a conservative or a moderate, I think you would rather have a functioning Article I legislative branch than one that's gridlocked. And a lot of the gridlock in Washington, and frankly the gridlock in state capitals and the inability to tackle some of the major issues is related to redistricting abuses.
It is what I think leads to the gridlock that's happening in Congress, where neither side is willing to give, and we have session after session where bills don't get passed and nobody's talking to each other.
More and more often, I think Virginians and Americans say, well, I'm not even going to vote. And we've seen in particularly non-presidential years, voter turnout in Virginia go as low as around 40%. In a state like Virginia, where in our own lifetimes, people protested in the streets and led a civil rights movement, which was all about trying to empower and making sure every Virginian got a chance to vote.
One of the reasons why voter turnout is so low is that the incumbent is almost always reelected and very few are opposed. 2 years ago in the congressional elections, there are 435 seats in the United States House of Representatives. Only 32 of those 435 were considered to be competitive. And of those 32 that were competitive, only 7 were considered to be toss-ups. So 400 were not considered to even be competitive because of political gerrymandering primarily.
The same can be said for districts within Virginia's General Assembly, with the elections in 2015 proving that no matter how hard each side tried to change the makeup of the state Senate, the needle wasn't moving.
Again, a lot at stake in today's state Senate races. On the line was the possible change of power in that chamber.
But in the end, amazingly, no incumbents lost their races. That means Republicans keep control of the state Senate.
Quentin Kidd, our CNU political analyst, joins us now with more on what all of this means. Quentin, $45 million spent. No incumbents lost, no seats changed hands, and the governor spent a lot of political capital on this election. What did he get for it?
Yeah, I'm not sure the governor got anything at all. This is also testament to just how gerrymandered Virginia is. I mean, we had $45 million plus spent and not a seat changed and not an incumbent lost.
Now, I worked hard to try to get one seat in the state Senate. Went out and raised, I think, like $18 million. After all the effort, both sides, it stayed exactly the same.
In the age of computers, you can gerrymander with scientific precision. You can run in and out of alleys and up and down streets and carefully include and exclude whichever voters you want in one district and not in another. So it's become a very precise science, and it's linked with increased partisanship.
So this is redistricting software that can be used by legislators when they're drawing maps, local governments when they're drawing districts, or even litigators or nonprofits when they're trying to provide alternate maps and show how much better districts can look. And so these blue lines are the place that you vote and everyone who votes with you. And with a simple click of a mouse, I could pick up one whole voting precinct, one whole voting district, and move it from one district into another. And that's the kind of action that legislators do as they're drawing these maps. For example, if I want to change the border between District 71 and District 70, I can simply click the census blocks that I want to move from one district to the next, and click and move them over. Those census blocks, literally city blocks, are now no longer in District 70, they're in District 71. Legislators can make one district very, very heavily in favor of their opposition party and all of the neighboring parties just favorable enough that they can win election. The result can be that they don't win the majority of the votes, but they win the majority of the seats anyway.
Running a campaign is scientific now, and I don't know if people realize this, but I could take the data that we have available and I could go to each house and tell you who's in that house, do they vote, and how they vote. And so when you combine that with a legislator who wants to stay in power, that's a bad recipe, but that's the reality of it.
The evil today, that the driving force, I think, in partisan gerrymandering now is maximizing the strength of a given party. You pack as many people of the opposing party into as few districts as possible, spread the other districts out in a way that you have a manifest advantage in the elections in your state. This happens all over the country.
Packing takes the noble goal of increasing minority participation as mandated by the Voting Rights Act and turns it on its head. Virginia's 3rd district makeup that was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2016 is an example of packing as a form of racial gerrymandering, which had the effect of suppressing minority voting power in surrounding districts.
Let me tell you what was so illegal about that. It prevented African Americans from having any influence in other districts that surrounded the 3rd. And so to the extent that gerrymandering for racial reasons is illegal, is because that's exactly what has happened. I used to say that they pretty much put all the African Americans on one island.
There have been concerns expressed about racial gerrymandering and the Voting Rights Act. But the truth is the Voting Rights Act only requires that minorities have a fair opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. It doesn't require packing minorities into the district. It doesn't require creating a supermajority. That's what's been done by the gerrymanderers to promote their own partisan agenda.
Certainly it's devastated the communities because when it comes to representation, when you have communities of interest and the districts are lumped or packed together solely on ethnicity, the court has ruled that was unconstitutional. But here it is. Those who are mapping and those who are drawing districts have gotten smart. Now it's called political gerrymandering. So now the challenge is going to be not so much racial gerrymandering, because the court has pretty much said that's unconstitutional based on cases that we've seen and cases right here in Virginia in the 3rd Congressional District. Political gerrymandering will be the next challenge, that these districts are now drawn because of their political affiliation, their political leaning, and they are drawn to manipulate the voter constituency.
The 2010 off-year elections turned a record number of state legislatures from blue to red, and those legislatures succeeded in gerrymandering district lines to solidify their gains for years to come. It was all the brainchild of Richmonder Chris Jankowski and the initiative he created, Operation Red Map for Redistricting Majority Project.
This was the guy I picked, who's here for the interview tonight. I picked him as my nominee for the unsung political genius of our time. It was the job of Red Map to specifically try to win in the states. And to get even more specific than that, their plan, what they were designed to do, was to flip as many state legislatures as possible from Democratic control to Republican control, from blue to red.
The trick here was trying to go to the national donors and the national folks and say, hey, look, here's an opportunity in the state legislatures to what we thought was set it up in 2012 to take U.S. Congress. But by the summer of 2010, we realized, well, we're going to get the House.
This year, yeah.
So what we're going to do is lock that in.
For a decade.
Well, sure, you have to turn the clock back and realize that President Obama had been elected, lost complete control of Congress. So Democrats had complete control in Washington, and they had control of the issue agenda, and Republicans were demoralized. And so there was a group of folks that came together and thought, okay, what can we do to slowly turn this tide? You can't turn this tide overnight. Republicans worked hard in some ways to get themselves in the hole we found ourselves in at that point. And one of the things was, well, redistricting is coming up. And the 2010 elections are going to be the final and the last election that will have the last say in that, and who will have the advantage that could be built. We had some ideas on how that could be pulled off. I mean, we set a record for any political party in this country ever in the net gain of state legislative seats. I certainly did not go in thinking, wow, we're going to set a record, but we did. I definitely, by Friday before the election, I told the Washington Post that we were looking at upwards of 14 to 15 state legislative gains, chambers, which is by definition a wave year, and we ended up with 20. I am skeptical of redistricting reform. I'm not against it, though. I do think that both parties are capable of overreach. And when you do that, I hope the voters punish them. My thing is, once you pick up this pen and you start drawing that map, and you have to decide, do I go down the street? Do I go left? Do I go right? Where does this district turn left? What is compact and contiguous? Every decision has a partisan impact, has an impact on the Republican or Democratic performance of that district. And so it's inherently political. So I feel like, going back to our Constitution and our Founding Fathers, they tended to put the inherently political things into the hands of the inherently political people. And they just let the people who represent those, who elect those people, sort it out.
We'll just change the boundary, we'll redraw the lines, 'cause the people in these districts vote the wrong way every time, but move the borders and we will dominate. First take away the people's choice, and then we'll rule the state.
A number of states are considering and implementing redistricting reform. Among the first in recent years to gain a great deal of attention was California, where the citizen initiative Proposition 11 was passed in 2008. With the support of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Proposition 11 was designed to take the power of redistricting out of the hands of the legislators who stood to gain by protecting their own turf.
Yes, Governor? He said that this whole entire office is going to vote yes on Proposition 11. Bring that down! And I have to give you a compliment. He says that you explained it so eloquently. He says there's no way not to vote yes.
The district lines were being drawn by the very politicians that held office, and they were being drawn more with an eye towards protecting their seat and making their district safe for them, so it would be less competitive and there'd be less accountability.
Global Director Bonnie Reese, a former California Secretary of Education, worked for Massachusetts Senator Edward Kennedy before aligning herself with the Republican Schwarzenegger. Even after leaving office, Schwarzenegger's reform efforts continued with the creation of the Schwarzenegger Institute for State and Global Policy. Based at the University of Southern California, the Institute promotes putting the interest of the public ahead of political parties.
They looked at two things. One, the gerrymandered districts, and how do we change that? How do we end gerrymandering and create a system of redistricting that's fair and honest? And the other one is our top two open primary. And that was done as a way to try to reduce partisan divisiveness and extremism. The concept was that if it's an open general primary where Republicans, Democrats, independents, any affiliation you have, you run in the same primary and all California voters vote for you. And the top two vote getters go on to the general election.
We've seen in California a change where, as a result of the redistricting reforms, we now have Republicans who are talking to the entire district and who, because they're not in a super safe district and it's not necessarily just the primary that they're worried about, they're thinking about that larger picture.
Meanwhile, voters in Ohio have overwhelmingly backed redistricting reform for state legislative races, and the Buckeye State's Republican governor has thrown his support behind a move to extend that reform to congressional redistricting as well.
Making sure we all have a chance to contribute and that we all have a voice was why we came together last year across party lines to reform the way Ohio's legislative districts are drawn. Our goal was the right one, to make the process less about politics and more about inclusion. Ideas and merit should be what wins elections, not gerrymandering. When pure politics is what drives these kinds of decisions, the result is polarization and division. I think we've had enough of it. Gerrymandering needs to be on the dustbin of history.
For recent context, the 2012 congressional elections showed that 52% of voters in Ohio cast their ballots for Republican candidates and 48% for the Democratic Party, a fairly even split. But in the end, that translated into 12 House seats for the GOP, with just 4 going to the Democrats. Virginia's neighbor to the north has been a mirror image of the Commonwealth, with a Democratic legislature and a Republican governor. But the lopsided results were similar to Ohio's. In 2012, Democrats won in Maryland by a nearly 2-to-1 margin, but they ended up taking 7 of the Old Line State's 8 House seats, with Republicans awarded just 1.
In Maryland, we have the unfortunate distinction of being the most gerrymandered state in the entire nation. We created a redistricting reform commission to fight for the nonpartisan drawing of district lines, something that nearly all Marylanders are strongly in favor of. We ask you to join with us in that fight.
In fact, if you were to stretch out the district line of Maryland's 3rd district, it would reach from Washington, D.C. just about to Boston. And yet it only contains an area about the size of Montgomery County. You know, it is, in its way, a masterpiece of gerrymandering. It is the state of the art in terms of that art as it now stands. Remember that we lecture the world. We point our finger at other countries and we tell them to be democracies and we tell them how they should conduct their democratic practice. Where do we get off doing that? If you look at Maryland's 3rd district, how dare we? We should fix our own house.
Just to our south is another heavily gerrymandered state. Don Vaughn served 2 terms in the North Carolina Senate, in the process becoming best known as the sponsor of a bill that tightened the Old North State's animal abuse statute. But despite his accomplishments, Vaughn's tenure was short-lived.
My district now goes 2 blocks around my house and is zoomed off to the Virginia line. Never in the history of this area has there ever been legislative seats to go that way, not in the 200-year history. There will be very few contested races because they have been drawn to protect the incumbent or protect a particular individual. Well, there's no point in challenging that individual because you can't win. That's bad for the system.
So are you optimistic things will change?
I'm hopeful things will change.
There's no question that there still is a cloud over the southern states, and there is a presumption that things are done on a racial basis. And whether you believe that or not, I think we've got to do something to totally dispel it.
The effort to get politics out of redistricting is done around the country in principally 3 ways. The first is through litigation in the court system, and I've been working on that in Wisconsin, and there's also litigation in Maryland and North Carolina. The second is through citizen-led ballot initiatives, and this has been quite successful in states like Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida. The third way is for politicians themselves to pass legislative reform. This has worked in New York and to some extent Ohio. Now it's up to Virginia to decide its path forward.
In Virginia, these issues are all too familiar. Take the 2012 congressional elections once more. Republican candidates took a slim 2-point edge in total votes cast, but that translated into just 3 seats for Democrats. In fact, in national congressional results, Democratic candidates received more than 1 million more votes than their Republican counterparts, yet the GOP snagged 33 more seats.
And then on this prior check where they didn't
But this goes beyond disproportionate results in Congress. Those who have the power to draw district lines can target specific colleagues in order to make it impossible for them to continue serving in office. In Virginia's 2011 redistricting battle, there was one very highly publicized casualty, Delegate Ward Armstrong, the highest-ranking Democrat in the House of Delegates.
I was first elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in 1991, took office in January of 92, served there 20 years. The last 4 years I was the minority leader, the Democratic leader of the House. I went through 2 redistrictings, survived one but not the other. My district was basically packed up and shipped to Northern Virginia. The 10th House District in Southside Virginia ceased to exist. It was moved quite literally to Northern Virginia.
These new district lines made it nearly impossible for Armstrong to win in his bid for re-election. But he didn't give up. He actually moved into a family home a few miles away in the newly redrawn 9th House District, a controversial decision at the time.
In retrospect, I'd have been better off throwing in the towel, but that just is not something that's part of my fabric. You know, I've never ducked a fight in my life, and I wasn't going to let them take me out in a redistricting bill. They were going to take me out at the ballot box. They did, but it wasn't without a fight. And I fought with every inch and breadth in me on how to keep that seat. Impossible. Couldn't be done.
Despite his persistence throughout the campaign, Delegate Armstrong lost his re-election bid in 2011, and he was persistent.
Anybody that knows me for 5 minutes can tell that shy and retiring are not 2 of my stronger qualities, that I raised hell on a daily basis with the Republican majority, and they wanted to silence me because I was a pain in their neck, maybe 3 feet lower.
Armstrong now practices law full-time in Martinsville. He's also moved back home.
In 2011, Virginia was in a unique position. The General Assembly had divided control, where the Senate was controlled by Democrats and the House was controlled by Republicans. And what reformers were hoping that meant is that we'd actually get redistricting reform, since no party had a monopoly here.
Instead, what Virginia got was a heavy dose of incumbency protection, where lawmakers of both parties in both houses make deals to protect their own seats.
The problem is it's such inside baseball that there's a disconnect. You start to talk about raising somebody's taxes, or we're going to do something that's going to impact your kid's school or touch your life directly. But when you start to talk about redistricting, it is so far disconnected from most people's lives that it just doesn't resonate as an issue. It is the most insidious, invasive part of the political process. It permeates everything. I think it's a cancer on the political system, and I don't think that's an overstatement.
But Republicans certainly aren't the only ones guilty of this in recent memory. In the early 1990s, there was another even higher profile victim of gerrymandering in Virginia.
Too often now, redistricting is used to keep somebody in a seat rather than draw somebody out of a seat. But we have a very famous case, recent case in Virginia's history, where George Allen, Congressman George Allen, was drawn out of his district very successfully by Democrats.
Well, it was 1991, and it's quite a year in the Allen family life. In July of that year, French Slaughter, who was a congressman from the 7th Congressional District, where I resided, unexpectedly announced that he was going to resign midterm. So there was going to be a special election. Folks said, you got to run for it. We won the nomination, won the election. I was on top of the world, exhilarated. 2 weeks later, the General Assembly gets to congressional redistricting, and they find my log house that was on a gravel road in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and put it in with Tom Bliley's City of Richmond district. The folks said, well, you ought to move. And I said, I don't know, that doesn't seem right to move. And it didn't seem right either to run against Tom Bliley, who was senior to me and a good counsel to me. And so a lot of people said, well, you ought to run for governor. So we started off, when they first did any polls, 31% behind, but ultimately won.
Allen left the governor's office in 1998 with an approval rating above 60% and later became a United States Senator, all because he was forced out of his congressional district a decade earlier.
Things work out. The Lord works in mysterious ways.
So, if prominent members of both major political parties agree there's a problem, where does Virginia go from here? How do we tackle these systemic issues head on?
One Virginia 2021 is a special organization. It was founded by members of different political parties who all came together and said that these districts belong to Virginians, not to any politician or any political party, but to Virginians. And we've got to find a way to restore that.
The reason I was so willing and so excited to help launch One Virginia is because while I was in the General Assembly, I saw firsthand how critical it was for legislators to work together to solve problems. And while reform is not going to change the number of seats dramatically, what it will do is make the districts less partisan and less polarized, actually giving legislators a chance to reach across the aisle, work together, debate ideas, and solve problems.
According to One Virginia, their mission is to advocate for the creation of an independent redistricting commission, independent of the General Assembly, to draw legislative district lines. The commission would be required to use clearly defined, objective criteria, invite public participation, and be fully transparent.
We're fighting this battle on all fronts, through public education, through grassroots advocacy to our state legislature, and in the courts. The court battles are important because they add a sense of urgency to the timeline of an otherwise every decade process, but they also help curb the most egregious excesses of the last redistricting we went through. But at the end of the day, in 2021, Virginia's going to be faced with having to draw new lines for our state legislature and Congress. We got to fix the process. We've got to get it right.
In my 18 years in the Attorney General's office, I handled all of the major redistricting litigation in the Commonwealth. I got to see firsthand how both parties manipulated the lines and distorted their districts to preserve their own partisan advantage. The system was corrupt then, and it is still corrupt now. We need to fix it, and we need to use all of the tools available to us, including grassroots education, legislative reform, and the courts.
One element of One Virginia's comprehensive strategy was the creation of a web campaign prior to the 2016 General Assembly session that was designed to tap into voter frustration while reaching out to more young people across Virginia. The video looks and feels like a traditional political ad, but it features a fake candidate with a strangely familiar-sounding name.
I'm gerrymandering, and I approve this message. Virginians need change and hope or whatever, and I'll bring change and hope or whatever by picking my voters and redrawing district maps to ensure I always get reelected. Heck, every single member of the General Assembly who was already in office got reelected last year thanks to the Commonwealth's unfair redistricting process.
With a candidate literally named gerrymandering, One Virginia brought to life how public officials can be unreceptive to their constituents simply because they know how safe their district lines are.
So vote for me, gerrymandering. Probably definitely running unopposed.
Some people in the General Assembly deserve a lot of credit. They've been working on this issue for a very long time, even at the risk of hurting their own party.
I will tell you that when I introduced it in 1982, Democrats were dominant in the legislature. I thought it was a statesmanlike thing to do, for heaven's sakes. I've reintroduced it now with the Republicans in power, and they have sometimes started their committee meetings by saying, oh yeah, we understand why you want to do that. You want to get back in power. And I hold up my little 1982 bill and say, see, I was doing this back when Democrats were in power because it's the right thing to do.
I've been an advocate for reform measures in the past. I've carried legislation almost every year since I've been elected. There are lots of ways to get there, and there are lots of moving parts in the redistricting process. But at the end of the day, however you do it, whatever your reform measure is, coming up with a process where you feel like that the public and your constituents believe that, number one, there's transparency, number two, there's consistency, and number three, there's fairness in that process.
You will never take politics altogether out of it, but I think an independent group will have less political considerations influencing the decisions than if elected politicians have at it and no one else is involved.
I have come to the conclusion that the best way is to have nonpartisan redistricting commissions or a bipartisan redistricting commission or independent redistricting commission to draw maps that are fair and that favor the voter and not the incumbent.
It always passes in the Senate. There's always been bipartisan support in the Senate. And then it gets to the House, and it usually in a wee hour of the morning in a subcommittee where there's no recorded vote, it just kind of fades away, and that's the last folks hear about it until the next year.
Morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and bring the subcommittee to order here. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Mindy Carlin. I represent the Northern Virginia Chamber Partnership. That includes the Loudoun County, Dulles Regional, and Greater Reston Chambers in Northern Virginia, 2,800 businesses representing 100,000 jobs. And I'm here to express support for the criteria bills that you heard about earlier.
Good morning. I'm Mary Jo Fields with the Virginia Municipal League. We too support redistricting reform.
Carol Nagle with the League of Women Voters of Virginia, and we certainly support changes in the redistricting process.
I'm John Easter with the Greater Richmond Chamber. I'd like to express our support for the 3 redistricting criteria bills.
I'm Kathy Bircher with the Virginia Education Association. We also are in support of the criteria bills and the voter referendum bills.
Reggie Ford with the Richmond Crusade for Voters. We do support the redistricting.
My name is Damus Boudreau. I represent the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations and the Virginia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and we support legislation that would encourage fair and open redistricting. Thank you.
My name is Karen Raschke, representing the Richmond First Club. We support redistricting reform for fair redistricting, and any and all these bills make a giant step in that direction.
Is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition of the bills? Any more comments this morning? Any questions from the committee on the bills for any of the patrons?
There's no such thing as an independent redistricting commission, and there's no way to take the politics out of an inherently political process. You know, whenever you set up these independent commissions, the politics just goes to a different level as to who makes the appointments to the commission, who gets to serve on the commission, and so forth. So I'm sorry, but I've seen various independent redistricting plans, and none of them, I think, really take the politics out of it. They just elevate it to a less transparent level. So I'm going to make a motion that we, based on that we table all the bills in block 1.
Respond by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No. Madam Chair, if I could just say for the record, I mean, those bills were, a lot of them were very different and had merits and maybe non-merits to be discussed. This is the first time I can remember 5 bills that were so different being put in one block to be killed.
I was very disappointed that the majority used a procedure. I did not know this was going to happen, to put all 5 bills of substance that affect better nonpartisan, bipartisan redistricting into one motion to table all 5 of them at the same time. And a motion to table it's not discussable. You can't debate it.
That's the way business is done over in the House of Delegates. Should they choose not to have a piece of legislation see the light of day, they put people in particular that they select on those committees who would be opposed to redistricting because it would threaten their chances of staying in the seats that they hold. And so those committees are stacked. That's politics at its best or worst, whichever way you're looking at it.
I've always claimed that I have a right to be smarter today than I was yesterday, and I am much smarter today than I was yesterday. We drew districts that protected incumbents. It's just the way the culture is. However, that process undermines democracy. It's not healthy for the democratic process.
In the 200 plus years of Virginia's history, there's never been a sustained period between redistricting where there's been a conversation about redistricting like there has been right now.
20 years ago, if you had mentioned an independent redistricting commission, it would have been laughed out off the Capitol Hill. But now people are actually listening and voting for it.
We need to build political momentum over time. And it seems to me that that's the far better approach to this. And that what they are doing is that they are educating more citizens about this. They are educating more legislators about this. They are getting more support from people and governors and prior governors and the like. And that this is the way to actually sort of move this forward.
I believe that once people get more familiar with it and understand, and we perhaps go through another redistricting, that I think we'll get there. Absolutely.
I was born and raised in Virginia, and I love this Commonwealth. This is the best place on earth to live as far as I'm concerned. But I also remember massive resistance. I remember school segregation. I remember the vestiges of the darker days in Virginia's history. We got past that. I don't see why we can't hope for the same thing with legislative apportionment.
The millennials are sick and tired of this party label thing. They want to know about the person, and they want to know what that person, how that person's going to represent them, and they insist on transparency. I think it's going to have to change. I really do.
This is ridiculous. It is too complicated to figure out where to vote and who my delegate is or state senator. There's got to be a better way, and I would hope that somebody who's running for governor in the future, or attorney general, lieutenant governor, state legislators, will run on this issue. Make it one of those darn right issues. And I think people could get behind it because it's a good government issue.
There are states that have done nonpartisan redistricting reform. Why would we want to be the last? Let's be a leader and join that effort. And I would hope that citizens might encourage their legislators in that way. What are you doing to promote fair legislative districts?
I've been very pleased to see the business community step up recently in terms of these statewide efforts to promote reform. I'm proud of the fact that we've got in this Virginia reform effort both Democrats and Republicans, former elected officials of great stature, saying, hey, we need to get this right in Virginia.
I think you can only postpone the right thing from happening for only so long.
People of goodwill will have to step forward and say, look, this is not the right way for us to legislate, that the voters should have a right to choose their representatives, and that we want a fair, nonpartisan commission to draw the lines.
It's not a question of if it's going to happen, the question is when it's going to happen. I think we're closer now than ever.